Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you once again on our weekly show. If you're joining us live on this Wednesday night, thank you so much for joining us. We have a couple of special guests, a big show to get to. We're going to get to our special guest in just our first special guest of two this week in just a second. John Sheeran, my co-host, is with us as always. John, how you doing this week, bud?
I'm feeling refreshed. Had a much needed bye week, and we definitely needed to get through the show. So let's get right into it, man.
Yeah, so I'm already seeing comments in our live chat. What are we going to talk about this week? Because the Bengals are 0-8. How much are they going to talk about? How much they suck this year? All that good stuff. Well, fortunately for us, we have been approached by a great figurehead in professional sports and North American professional sports, Jim Quinn. Attorney and now author. He has written a new book. It's titled, for those of you who are joining us via video, I've got it here, Don't Be Afraid to Win, How Free Agency Changed the Business of Pro Sports. Free agency is always a hot topic in the NFL and with the Cincinnati Bengals. So we thought, why not bring in Mr. Quinn to join us? And he is joining us on the phone here. Mr. Quinn, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Good to talk to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for making the time to talk to us. I told you before we started the show that I've read portions of the book, very, very entertaining, especially I'm a history major, poli-sci major, was pre-law for a little bit. So the historical aspects of everything, kind of interesting. Before we kind of jump into more specific questions, maybe give us an overview of the book, why you decided to write it, especially at this point in time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I thought that the whole story of how free agency came about in different sports was something that people ought to know about. Certainly, going back to my contemporaries, we lived it in the 70s and 80s and up through the 90s. But for a lot of the fans today, they just look at the system as it is and says, okay, this is how it is, and I guess this is how it's going to be. And I thought it'd be nice for people to know how it got to be the way it is, particularly in football, because of probably all the different fights we had in obtaining free agency for players. By far, the toughest was in football, not surprisingly, given the intransigence, arrogance, and greed of the NFL owners.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your book, especially the wealth disparity between owners and players, especially when the idea of free agency was kind of, coming about. I thought it was very interesting. I had definitely known your name in researching before reading the book, but, for our listeners who don't know, Jim was integral in bringing, developing free agency as what it is today. He's been involved in the CBA negotiations during the 2011 lockout. So a lot of interesting stuff in this book. Jim, I kind of want to go back to maybe the beginning portions of free agency. It's much different now than it was then. Maybe talk a little bit about your experiences and how it began to develop, especially in the NFL. I know in the early days there was Plan B free agency, which was kind of a weird, version of free agency.
Free agency at all. It was what we called farce free agency.
Right.
It all started really with basketball and baseball in the early 70s with lawsuits. The Kurt Flood case in baseball ultimately led to although that was unsuccessful, it led to an arbitration that Marvin Miller, the head of the baseball players, was able to orchestrate. And in basketball, which is how I got involved, we brought a lawsuit on behalf of Oscar Robertson and Bill Bradley and other stars in the NBA, and we were able to first crack open the concept of free agency. Football also had brought a lawsuit and was successful, but then for reasons that are difficult to explain, frankly, they bargained a lot of the issues away, and it wasn't until the late 1980s in football that when Gene Upshaw took over as the head of the union, Upshaw, of course, as a famous all-time great left guard of the Oakland Raiders, but more importantly, a great union leader, took the fighting against the richest and most intransigent group of owners in the history of the world, i.e. the NFL owners, and took them to court, and we were fighting something called Plan B. Plan B was a farce, basically, that simply meant that the clubs could reserve the rights to the best players on the team, and then they would allow players that they were otherwise going to be cut, they would allow them to be free agents, which is, of course, silly. Mm-hmm. And we attacked that Plan B as part of the lawsuit, and we had a 4-month jury trial in Minneapolis in front of an all-female jury that eventually voted for the players. And in fact, the title of the book, Don't Be Afraid to Win, comes out of when I got up to do the closing argument in that case. Yeah. Gene Upshaw leaned over and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Quinn, don't be afraid to win." That's where the title came from. And initially, free agency was in its infancy in football in the 90s, and we fought tooth and nail to expand it over time. And there have been trade-offs, but the system has worked reasonably well. I'm sure that the big fight, frankly, in the last round with the lockout wasn't really over free agency, although that was part of it. The real focus was over the split of revenues between the players and the owners, and they locked us out because, as rich as they were, they wanted more. Ultimately, there was a settlement that is about to end in another year or so, and I suspect there may be another fight.
So, Jim, that's kind of how it started, but like now it's evolved into something that I think not a lot of people expected it to become. And now the salary cap is going up by about $10 million every single year, specifically with the NFL. And it's not always the teams that spend the most that end up successful at the end of the year, but it's the teams who spend the most wisely. And there was a quote that I saved from a while ago. I didn't know when I was going to be able to use it, but I guess I can use it now. And it was a reporter from the Giants who basically said he got this information from someone who understands the cap like yourself. He said teams don't worry about the salary cap; it can always be manipulated. They worry about real cap. Can you kind of expand upon what that means, specifically to Bengals fans who maybe don't quite understand why their team specifically doesn't attack free agency like other teams, and what is really the key for NFL teams in terms of attacking free agency and attacking the salary cap?
Well, as you know, Mike Brown has been the owner of the Bengals for these many decades, and my experience with Mike over time was he was one of the most anti-player owners in all of the NFL by far, and I don't think a lot of that's changed. The reality is free agency allows teams who are well managed and know what they're doing to acquire players on the free agent market. Yes, they have to spend a few bucks, but as you just said, the salary cap can be easily manipulated because of the way the bonus system works, because bonuses are spread out over the number of years of the contract. So the salary cap in the NFL is actually quite soft. It's not as hard as people think it is, and any smart general manager can get around it. And it really has to do with whether or not, A, you really care about improving the team, and B, whether or not you have people in place who know what they're doing. You look at the Patriots, and I don't have to tell you how successful they've been. It's driven me crazy for the last decade or more. But the reality is they don't have one of the highest salaries in the league by far, but they know what they're doing, and they care about winning. I'm not so sure, sadly, that that's the case in Cincinnati.
Talking with Jim Quinn, he is an attorney and author. Don't Be Afraid to Win: How Free Agency Changed the Business of Pro Sports is his new book. Really cool read. Kind of gives a historical perspective and lays some groundwork potentially for some other issues with free agency, collective bargaining agreement that may be coming down the pike, particularly as it pertains to the NFL. Jim, on that front, you were there and you were instrumental in the way free agency was formed in the NFL. You were there in the 2011 lockout. Now the CBA is set to expire here in the near future in the NFL. How do you see that whole situation playing out and how it affects free agency potentially going forward?
Well, I think that, once again, there'll be a number of issues that will be in the forefront. The split of revenues will inevitably be a centerpiece, as will the commissioner's power to discipline players for on non-field activities. He hasn't done a great job of that so far, but he insists on keeping that power, even though all the other commissioners have long since given that up. Those are going to be critical issues, as are the health and safety issues. I don't think at this stage the NFL owners, as greedy and arrogant as they are going to make a run at trying to change free agency in any meaningful way. It's so ingrained in the system. And frankly, the fans love it. The fans, love the idea that they can get new players, not just through the draft, because as the draft has some importance, but frankly, once you get past the first round, the rest of it is much less important. And the way you're going to improve your team is, particularly in football, is through the competent way that you deal with free agency in acquiring players. As long as you're going to have to spend a few bucks and not be cheap.
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off of that, in your professional opinion, and I kind of think I know the answer to this, but I just kind of want to hear it from you yourself. What with these next CBA negotiations for the next one that comes out in 2021, what do you think is the more likely addition to that? A 17-game schedule or fully guaranteed contracts for players?
A 17-game schedule is probably more likely.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
They will fight like crazy against fully guaranteed contracts. Yeah. And the reason is because there are so many injuries. If you fully guaranteed all the contracts, you would then begin to have a problem with running up again. It would make manipulating the salary cap much more difficult.
Jim, I'm curious your thoughts on the XFL league that's going to be starting up or is attempting to start up. In one of the chapters of your book, which I found incredibly entertaining, you go back and you detail the USFL and Donald Trump's involvement and all of that. I found that to be an incredibly interesting read. I'm curious your thoughts based on that experience. Obviously, that's 30 years ago, and it's a different landscape now. But, I mean, I'm sure there's similar concerns, similar struggles, all of that has to be in play here. And I'm curious to know what you think about the viability of a league like that, especially with one just folding recently.
Look, I think that the USFL had its moment, and frankly, if Trump hadn't screwed it up, it probably would still be playing today. The notion of playing at a reasonably high level of good, solid football in the spring, when you're not directly competing with the NFL, is a viable notion. It's still viable today. The issue is, you're going to have to obtain the talent that people want to watch. Yeah. USFL, by their third year, they had a hell of a lot of good players playing in the USFL, yep. Many of whom ended up being stars in the NFL, including, among others, Reggie White and Jim Kelly, and I can go on. There was Mike Rozier, an enormous number of players who were successful in the NFL, and they had a good business plan. If the XFL or some other entity follows a simple business plan, attracts the right kind of talent, and plays at a time they're not playing head against the NFL. People love football and they'll watch it 365 days a year. So, yeah, they could make it.
Yeah. Jim, before we get you out of here, thank you again for your time, by the way.
Sure.
We would be remiss if we did not ask for a Mike Brown or a Cincinnati Bengals story. I'm sure throughout your illustrious career, your lengthy career in dealing with the NFL, I'm sure you've dealt with Paul Brown. I'm sure you've dealt with Mike Brown on some level, either something that's going to give us a laugh, especially in an 0-8 season here, or something that will corroborate maybe some of our beliefs about the team in the front office. We would like to hear something if you're able to give us something.
Well, I guess the one memory I have, and this was back when we were fighting about free agency early on, and we actually won the first case, and we're trying to reach a settlement that would allow for free agency and with some kind of a salary cap. And I remember being in a conference room in the airport in Dallas Fort Worth, and Mike Brown was one of the owners who was on their negotiating committee. And there were a number of difficult owners, including Al Davis, who was another superstar, difficult person. But we were sitting around in the room trying to debate different issues. And at some point, even though we had already won the case, Mike Brown just shook his head, looked at Gene Upshaw and me, and said, "I'm never ever going to agree to this. Never. I think it's wrong. I think I should have control over my players forever." And I remember looking at Upshaw saying, "This guy's crazy."
Yep. And that is, at least from what I know, that is definitely a learned emotion from his father. His father was very, very much a controller of his players as well. Again, the book is Don't Be Afraid to Win: How Free Agency Changed the Business of Pro Sports. Excellent read. I find it incredibly entertaining. Again, I haven't read every single word of it, but I've read quite a bit of it, Jim. Just from a historical perspective, to learn what you have done, and not only the NFL but the other sports leagues, you have led a very interesting and successful career, sir. We thank you for your time. Just before we say goodbye to you, how can our listeners get your book? Where can they find it? All that good stuff.
Sure. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever good books are sold. The easiest thing is just to go online and order it online, and it'll be there, be shipped in 2 days, and you can have it and have fun and enjoy it. I'm glad you enjoyed the book so far, and I think once you've read all of it, you'll have liked it that much more. Yeah, it really is excellent, and I'm glad that I got a copy of it, and like I said, very entertaining read, and I'm looking forward to finishing it. But thank you so much for your time. We'll definitely keep promoting your book, and we'd love to have you back on sometime if you're open to it. Sure. Absolutely. Enjoyed it. Good talking to you guys. All right, thank you, sir. Care. That was awesome. That was Jim Quinn, attorney and now published author. Don't Be Afraid to Win, again, is the book. The interview is brought to us by Casabella Realty Group, the Southern California real estate specialists. They have a website, CasabellaRealtyGroup.com. You can go there, get Southern California real estate information if you are in the area, if you're looking to relocate, what have you. Go to their website and get some information there. Dude, I thought that was pretty cool. I guess I find it a little more because you don't have a copy of the book, John.
Way to keep rubbing that in, by the way.
I know, but I don't know. You're a history guy. You were more econ, but I don't know. Just the historical perspective. How I found it kind of is like it reads, and I mean this complimentary. It reads like you're sitting down with a guy and you ask him, what was it like? You're having a couple of cocktails and you ask a guy who has 30, 40 years of experience in professional sports, in the courtrooms, battling it out with iconic people. You have a couple cocktails and you get a very well written, but a somewhat unfiltered version of things. I think it's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, to filter out all the BS about all that stuff. That's what I'm about. And like I would love to learn more about all that stuff because like kind of like how we alluded to, us Bengals fans are very unfamiliar with the concept of quality free agency. So to learn anything more about that, it's fun. It's fun not being the smartest guy in the room for once. So I'm definitely appreciative of that.
Well, you're definitely you are the second smartest guy on the show. So
it's a distinction I take very proudly. So.
Well, that was Jim Quinn. Go get the book, guys. Seriously, I think it's like $25 or something. It's very interesting. And it's not, we focused on the NFL with him, obviously this being a Bengals podcast, but it talks about stuff with hockey, his work with the National Hockey League, the NBA, a lot of big names in there, a lot of owners. There is this is a book with opinions, so be aware of that. But I found it to be really a really cool read. So our thanks to him. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play. You can get it on YouTube, and all of our stuff is on Cincy Jungle. And as I teased last week, I believe we have now been approved for iHeartRadio. I looked on iHeartRadio's website, and our podcast, the Cincy Jungle podcast, is there. So if you want to if that's how you prefer to get your podcasts, go to iHeartRadio, and the Cincy Jungle podcast will be there. And that has our show. It has Matt Minnick's Chalk Talk. It has Orange is the New Black. A couple episodes of Sorry If I Spit When I Speak with Dr. Hoji Smoji and Daddy-O McDuke. So, and John Sheeran. John Sheeran's on that show too. He's all over the place, man. But yeah, you can get it there. You can get it to all those places. So get it how you can. Subscribe, leave a review, hopefully a positive one. Thanks for listening.
So let's transition from the topic of free agency to a potential free agent for the Bengals, and that's AJ Green. Zach Taylor, right before Wednesday's practice, talked with the media, said that AJ is likely to play this week, or he's planning on playing, and he was planning on practicing for Wednesday's practice. And as it turns out, Wednesday practice went and gone, and AJ did not go. Apparently, he had a setback with some ankle swelling, which, for being 3 months into a sprained ankle, it's kind of weird to see swelling at this late stage of the recovery. But it is interesting because, as we are well accustomed to with Bengals injuries, they're not normally traditional or always quick recovery. we've seen that with Cordy Glenn as well, along with AJ this year. But I just think it kind of starts a conversation, right? The Bengals are 0-8 now, and it's been so long since AJ has played, and you would think that he would be back at this point by now. And then there was just another setback to go through, and it's kind of starting to think like, with him and the Cordy situation, like it's not the area that I was planning on starting, but it's occupying my brain right now. Are we seeing maybe potentially with a guy who's still in a contract year who would like to be signed under a contract or enter free agency or whatever? Is this a guy kind of making a business decision right now with a rookie head coach and an uncertain future and an uncertain, overall feel of where the organization is, or is he just really just not ready to go yet? Here I am.
Are you ready? I'm going to ride the fence, my friend. I'm going to ride the fence here. I think it's a little bit of both. I really do. I think there was a report, I believe, from Tom Pelissaro of NFL.com who said, AJ practiced earlier this week, and then, on Wednesday when he was supposed to suit up, the swelling kind of hit after doing a workout, and he didn't want to suit back up. He's now day-to-day. So I do think there's something there. I think, and I think, quite honestly, he's pushing it. And I think the Bengals understated how serious this issue was. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they didn't diagnose it correctly, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think anybody really foresaw how serious this actually was. And maybe this should have been a IR return at a minimum. It should have been maybe an IR just for the year, call it a wash. I just, and You know that guy. He's very athletic. He cuts. He's not only is he very athletic, and he can cut a lot because of his athleticism, but he does cut a lot given the position he plays. So that's gonna be hard on your ankle after coming off of surgery. So I do, and knowing AJ too, he doesn't seem to be a head game guy, right? I mean, if he wants to play, he's gonna play, and if he's well enough to play, he's gonna do it. And you saw when he had that injury occur in training camp, how frustrated he was, right? He was throwing his helmet. He was so upset. He wanted to be back out there. He knew it was probably something somewhat severe. And, that's who he is. So I think there is, I think it's mostly that. I think it's mostly, he experienced swelling. He's not going to risk it. He is looking for a one last big contract, and he's not going to do it. I do think that if the Bengals were in the middle of a playoff push, he'd probably fight through it a little bit more harder than if they were 0-8. I don't want, that's not me questioning his effort. I just think that's maybe natural human emotion in a situation like this. But, and that's not me questioning anything about the guy, but I'm kind of feeling like maybe there'd be a little bit more urgency if the team wasn't 0-8.
Oh, absolutely. And if this coaching staff showed any promise of any sign of competence in that, but like you said, like AJ doesn't play head games, and I don't think he could even if he wanted to. He's just the most straightforward, no BS kind of guy. If he wants to play, he'll play, but he also knows his worth, and he knows, and that was something that he said. I don't want to be tagged, and I want to be fairly competent, which is completely understandable and reasonable because he has all the leverage in these ongoing negotiations right now. And I know people are saying, maybe if he wasn't being lowballed right now, or if the negotiations haven't stalled, maybe that ankle is a little bit better and he would work his way back in now. But at the end of the day, he 100% throughout this process, he said he wasn't going to rush it. And like you said, the team did its normal spin doctor and pushed it as some type of non-serious issue that is obviously more serious than we were initially led to believe. It's a high ankle sprain, and those things take time. And right now, with this entire situation kind of funneling into what it is right now, and it's an 0-8 team with a coaching staff that has a lot to prove, and being in a contract year, it's taking it as slow as it could be expected to. So at the end of the day, AJ is who he is, and he's not going to play these mind games or whatever, but he's going to do what is smart for AJ. Despite him, having this perception of being a team guy, he's not going to rush back and ruin his chances at a third contract, especially in a year that's basically lost. Like you said, I don't think he doesn't want to play. He absolutely does want to play, and he wants to help his team out and all that stuff. But if his ankle's not right, his ankle's not right, and I think that's just about as straightforward as you can get.
Yep. Do you think it's wise, given the news that he experienced some swelling and he's now day to day? The Bengals were all but set that he's going to play against the Ravens, and likely as they got more and more news on this towards the beginning part of the injury, they probably circled the first game after the bye and said, okay, this is what we're going to do last half of the season. Who knows? Maybe, first couple of weeks they said maybe we're competitive, and that's, he'll give us a last half of the season push, as we sit here now. But I think they circled that. But do you think it's even a wise decision for him to play if he's still experiencing swelling, after a practice that seemed, I think it was basically his first full go practice. He's experiencing swelling.
Yeah, like there's just more logic into just shutting down AJ than there is putting him back out there on a team that has no wins right now and is not competing for the playoffs. Like at the end of the day, if they're thinking long term with AJ and they want him around here, there's little point in playing him now other than just giving Ryan Finley a fair chance, which is fair. If they do want to see what he has, having AJ out there would give them a better idea of what Ryan Finley is with all the weapons around him. But at the end of the day, this team isn't going anywhere this year. And this is a conversation that they're going to probably have to have with Jonah Williams, who isn't slated to come back until at the very earliest the first week of December. By then, the Bengals could be like 0-12 at that point. Do you really want to bring out your first round pick into 4 basically meaningless games? So it's all about, seeing maybe how he is with a quarterback that they could want to further invest in themselves, but there's more logic in just shutting him down this year if he's not going to be able to get 100% in time for them to do really anything but just evaluate the rest of the roster.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier the quote unquote business decision. I think the Bengals are making a business decision by still keeping him in the conversation of playing the second half of the season. And what I mean by that is now they've made a quarterback change. They are in this quote unquote evaluation mode, as they've put it. And they need to see what this rookie quarterback has, and they need to see what he has with AJ Green on the field. And they need to see what AJ Green has left in the tank coming off another injury. And if they want to make another heavy investment in him, which I think they do, and I think they will, but all of these are business decisions, I think, by the coaching staff and management, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. Like AJ, again, he's not stupid. Like, he wants to play, but he's not going to risk it all for a couple of meaningless games and further set back his health issues. Like, there's a perception about him now that he's not washed, but he's very, very much injury prone, and I don't think that's something that sits well with him. As he trains and as he progresses and as he now enters his 30s, he wants to have another big payday, and he knows the place that is most likely to give that to him is Cincinnati. So he's not going to risk it all on a couple of meaningless games. But at the same time, he is AJ and he's a gamer and he wants to play out there, and especially if he wants to give his new quarterback a chance to look good. So yeah, I think it makes perfect sense, like you said, for it to be kind of both reasons. He's not going to force it back if it's not 100%. If he feels even the slightest swelling or setback with that ankle, he's not going to keep pushing when they're 0-8. And, at the end of the day, this is where we're at.
Yep. We're going to get to some more news and notes on the injury report here in just a second. Just want to let folks know that aside from having author and attorney Jim Quinn earlier in the episode on the program this week, we also have Jacob Loque from SB Nation's Baltimore Beatdown to help us talk about the upcoming Week 10 game. So he'll be joining us in about 5 minutes to talk about that. So excited to have him. If you remember, Jacob joined us a few months back after we kind of did a pre-training camp preview of all the AFC North teams. So he's probably one of the only guys who's super happy about how the season has played out so far for the division. But just some more news and notes here as we sit here midweek in terms of guys who didn't practice, guys who did. Cordy Glenn, full practice. Darquez Denard, full practice. Carl Lawson, full practice. He's been dealing with a hamstring injury. And John Miller, after suffering a groin injury, back at practice. So full practice as of Wednesday. So that is this is one of the healthiest the team has been as of this year. Tyler Eifert, he's usually get that midweek rest. He didn't practice as of Wednesday. As we mentioned, Green practiced earlier in the week and didn't practice Wednesday. Drake Kirkpatrick, suffering a knee injury, did not practice, and neither did Alex Redmond. Your thoughts on Glenn? I mean, it seems to be an ongoing saga, but your thoughts on him, especially getting a full practice in this Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for him to not practice at this point, because it's just kind of the expectation, I guess. With this team, with this season, you would expect another setback. But if it doesn't happen, I would assume he plays. And I know that Andre Smith came back in Week 8, and it was clear to play, but ended up not playing. John Jerry got the start, so maybe that's kind of the same role that they take with Glenn. I don't know if they throw him out there immediately if he's ready to go. If he is, and after everything that both sides have been through, I would hope he shows something and put some tape on this year. But if he does practice the next 2 days, I think that's less likely than him experiencing another setback. But I want to see him play. I want to see how he's come back from this concussion and just give Ryan Finley the best chance to throw some passes down the field.
Yeah, this is another one of those supposed business decisions maybe that the team needs to see that, number one, he's whatever the situation is. I think we tend to side with the player, especially when dealing with basically a brain injury. But there are some rumblings. We've heard Jim Lapham say some not so flattering things about Cordy Glenn and his attitude, and he's kind of been up and down in terms of his play since he's been here. So I think this is another business decision in this quote unquote evaluation process that the team needs to see where pardon the pun, where his head's at in terms of playing.
Boo.
I know, terrible. what his effectiveness is, and if he's going to be a long-term guy on this offensive line with Jonah Williams coming back, whether it's late this year, probably more likely next year. It's all part of what they need to do. So I am interested and will be watching how he performs this Sunday for sure.
It's just like it's a delicate situation for me because on one end you would want to see Glenn out there and you would hope that he's not faking anything or anything like that. But then you see situations going on with the Jets and the Washington football team where you have Trent Williams suing like the Redskins for not treating his cancer as anything serious and
right.
Thing is minor. And then Kalichi Asemele, having his injury issues and the Jets basically ignoring that. So you always have to, in my opinion, you always have to take the player side first before any tangible information comes out, because at the end of the day, these are, like Jim said, NFL owners are not exactly the most generous guys. They're pretty greedy human beings who like a lot of control over players. So yes, it's easy to get mad at Glenn, but at the same time, these are injuries. These are serious issues, and sometimes the information that we get is not always the most accurate one because it is the team that is disposing that information. So, hopefully Glenn's all right, but at the same time, you would like to see him out there.
Yep. But that is the practice report going forward here. We'll see exactly who suits up. Namely, the most interesting, of course, is Glenn and Green. So we'll see who suits up here as the Bengals host the Ravens coming up here on Sunday in Week 10. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this show and the other shows in the Cincy Jungle podcast network, or podcast channel rather. You can get it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, now on iHeartRadio. You can also get our stuff on YouTube, so you can subscribe and check out the videos there, as well as all of our content is on cincyjungle.com, so check it out there. We have another special guest tonight, and he is joining us once again on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. It's Jacob Loque, right?
Luke, actually.
Luke, that's right. I knew it was Loque.
It's all good. It's tough, man.
Yeah. Joining us here to preview Week 10. How are you, man? You got to be your team's on top of the division. You got to be feeling pretty good.
Yeah, I'm good, guys. It's been a while since we last talked. A lot has happened. My team's looked pretty good the last couple of weeks. I know you guys are off to a rough start, so it's interesting circumstances we're meeting in again here, but it's good to hear your voices. Yeah,
thanks for coming back on. And for those who are unfamiliar, Jake is with Baltimore Beatdown, part of the SB Nation network of podcasts. Let's just kind of get to it. A couple of weeks ago, if you were to have asked me my thoughts on the AFC North as a whole, I would have said largely disappointing. Baltimore seems like they're okay to pretty good. Pittsburgh is a wreck because of their quarterback situation. Obviously, the Bengals are a dumpster fire, and one could argue, even though that they have more wins than the Bengals, Cleveland is a bigger dumpster fire than the Bengals. Now, a couple weeks later, Baltimore has that nice win over New England. I don't know. Overall, kind of thoughts on the status of this team and really how good they can be.
It's interesting. I think they're still kind of like, my thoughts aren't totally changed after their win on Sunday night. I still think they're a very good team. I don't know if they're quite the great team that some people are making them out to be. I think that New England defense was maybe a little overrated, and we're a tad bit exposed by Ravens offense has been very good. But what I have been pleasantly surprised by in the past couple of weeks is the Ravens defense really turning things around. They got off to a rough start. Kyler Murray, made them look, kind of foolish with some big plays in that Week 2 game, even though they got a win. Pat Mahomes tore them apart. Nick Chubb and Baker Mayfield, to a certain extent, tore them apart. So it was looking rough through the first couple of weeks there for the defense, which I wasn't optimistic they were going to be great, but I thought they had a chance to be good. And through those first 4 weeks, man, it did not look good at all. But they made some signings, some new additions, and some trades that have really helped kind of change their fortunes, at least in the sense that they're getting more turnovers. So they're looking better. The offense is it's looked good all year. And so I think they're a very good team. They're a young team. And whether they can go the distance, I'm not totally sure about that. But that was a big win on Sunday night for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you put 37 points on the defense, I guess you have the tendency to call them overrated. But that was we should definitely appreciate what that Ravens offense did against the Patriots defense, but at the same time, like Belichick even said leading up, we don't have anybody who can emulate what Lamar Jackson does as a quarterback in running that offense, and that essentially is what we saw on Sunday and how they put up 37 points. So what has really been like the biggest development or change in that offense, and with Lamar specifically, that has allowed him to just grow, not only just as a runner, but as a passer too? Like, has it been just Greg Roman's, continuing evolving out that offense, or has it been critical steps that Lamar himself has taken?
I'm going to be lazy and say it's a combination of a ton of different things. I think Roman has done a fantastic job since taking over as the offensive coordinator back in the offseason. He's shown an ability to maximize talent when he has pieces like this. He did it back in San Francisco against the Ravens in that Super Bowl with Colin Kaepernick, and he's really translating that into an offense that's making Lamar very comfortable. As far as he goes, he's shown much more willingness to stand back there as a passer. He's improved his mechanics a ton, which is something that people aren't really going to notice.
Yeah.
Throwing with a wider base. He's doing different things with arm angles that are helping him a lot back there in the pocket. And he's still a very good runner. And another, big improvement that he's made is he's not taking nearly as much contact as he did last year as a runner, which for all the people that want to bring up the injury thing, I get that it's a real thing, but he's definitely improved as far as not taking those kind of car wreck hits that derailed guys like RG3, who he's now learning from as well. So I think it's a combination of different things. And I mean, listen, man, talent was an issue with this offense last year too, and they bring in some guys, Hollywood Brown, Mark Andrews has stepped up in a big way. Hayden Hurst is still there. Nick Boyle is still there. You also draft Miles Boykin in the third round, who's shown some things. So, and Mark Ingram too, you can't forget about him. So, talent is another thing that they were lacking a little bit in the offense, and I think that's helped a big piece of the offense as well.
I've said this a lot, Jake. I think that John Harbaugh is one of I don't know if you want to call him underrated because he has had success in the league, but I've seen him get this team to be competitive and really do more with less. Not so much this year. I mean, the Ravens are pretty talented, but especially with the additions you mentioned. But I don't know. There are times where Ravens fans seem to kind of turn on John Harbaugh. You mentioned the development of Lamar Jackson and how that's on Jackson and the offensive coordinator and all of that. But how much credit is due to John Harbaugh? I mean, it's not easy to make a quarterback change. He did that in the middle of last year. They went, pretty far. They seem to be the front runners to win the division again this year. And they just do everything pretty well, right? I mean, they're just across the board. They have the best kicker in the league. But, I mean, they seem to just do everything pretty well. And to me, that's a sign of good coaching from top to bottom. I don't know if there's really a question I'm asking here, but I kind of want to gush on John Harbaugh a little bit because I think he's a good coach, man. And I think he just continues to put this team in a good position.
Yeah, man. I mean, as far as your comment on him being underrated, I'd agree with you to a certain extent. And I don't even know if it's him being underrated. I think people realize he's a very good coach, but he's just sort of overshadowed, right? I mean, he's got a brother who's very high profile, a guy who's had a lot of success, doesn't have a Super Bowl ring like him, but that's neither here nor there. You got Mike Tomlin, who's a very similar coach who has had even, a little bit more success in the same division. You've got Bill Belichick, who he's kind of gone back and forth with. But I think the Ravens are sort of an organization where the logo speaks for itself more than any one name or person. And I think that sort of applies to him. And I mean, you didn't necessarily ask any one question there, but I would say he has, had a huge impact. I was not one of those people that wanted him to get fired last year. And I think, case in point for one of the best coaching jobs of his career last year, when Joe Flacco goes out with injury, they're 4-5, twisting in the wind, and you're wondering what's going to happen with them. He throws in a rookie quarterback, completely changes the offense on the fly. They go 6-1 down the stretch, and they win the division. And I just think that's a testament to the culture he's built. He's not a big X's and O's guy. He's not in there in the offensive meetings like Andy Reid scheming things up, but he's a guy who's able to facilitate all of that happening and doing it in a very cohesive way. So I'm very impressed with him as well, and I'm very glad that they've committed to him long term.
So being 6-2, being the top of the division, the Ravens are obviously very well rounded, specifically on the offensive end. You guys have a top 5 offense, I think, according to Football Outsiders. The one area that I think can be exploited, I guess, relatively when you even were talking about the Bengals, is potentially the run defense. And that's, I think, very important for the Bengals, who have the absolute worst rushing offense in the NFL. And it didn't really do very much in week 6 against the Ravens. Back then, I think Mixon didn't have that very good of a game. But if there was one area on that defense, that the Bengals could exploit it is in the run defense, and it is against that front seven, who, in fairness, isn't doing that well at rushing the passer either. So, how is really that unit adapted to losing some quality names from last year, like Terrell Suggs and CJ Mosley, and how have guys who have really stepped up into their roles have adjusted and have try to keep that whole unit afloat, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because they went into the season thinking that some of the guys in that front seven, maybe not with the pass rush, but definitely with the middle linebacking core, were going to step up, and just none of them did. But what's interesting about that is the run defense actually has stepped up a little bit in the past couple of weeks, and it's due to some additions that they made. They ship off Kenny Young, who was one of those young middle linebackers that I mentioned, to pick up Marcus Peters. So he's out the door, and then Patrick Owasso, who had a good season last year, not for nothing, but he's a young guy, and he was not playing well to start the year. So they bring in guys like Josh Hines and LJ Fort, who I don't know if you guys are even familiar with who they are, but they're a couple journeyman guys. I mean, Bynes was actually on the Ravens 2012 Super Bowl team. I mean, that's how much of a throwback he is for them. And these guys have really stepped up big time in terms of solidifying things on the front seven. So I would say the run defense the past couple of weeks has turned things around, and that's sort of what has helped them to sort of spur on this defensive renaissance that they're seeing the last couple of weeks. But yeah, the pass rush is definitely not there, man. You're right on with that. Terrell Suggs is gone. Zadarius Smith is gone. And there really isn't anyone that can kind of win a one-on-one matchup. So it's kind of all in the defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, to figure it out. And he's done a decent job with it, I think, but the lack of talent there is pretty glaring. So that would be their one big weakness, in my opinion.
Yeah, Fort had a cup of coffee with the Bengals a couple of years ago.
Every team, man. I looked at it on the Patriots podcast the other day, and they're like, "Yeah, he was with the Patriots for a preseason." I was like, "Damn, he was with every team. He was on the Steelers and the Eagles." Right. Lamar Jackson actually crossed him up when he was on the Eagles when they practiced together this past summer. So it's just kind of a funny thing.
Yeah. And some of that stuff it kind of plays into my comments about Harbaugh earlier. We're talking with Jacob Loque of Baltimore Beatdown, part of the SB Nation network, previewing Week 10. Let's talk more specifically about the upcoming game itself. John mentioned a potential area that could be exploited maybe on Baltimore's defense. I'm seeing some comments from our live listeners saying, could it be that Baltimore comes out flat, road game, they come off a big win against New England on a little bit of a shorter week? New quarterback for the Bengals, not a lot of film on him, and at least not NFL film. I don't know. I mean, it sounds silly for me to ask, being that the Bengals are 0-8, but I mean, does this have any kind of trap game, especially with some of the success the Bengals have had against the Ravens in recent years? Does this worry you at all in terms of a possible trap game?
Definitely, man. I mean, it's, crazy to think about looking, from the outside looking in on, this organization and this fan base, but we've seen it happen before with this team. I mean, you could even consider that Cleveland game in Week 4 a trap game. They came out totally flat after starting out 2-1. It's 2-2. And they go to 2-2, and the season's not looking so good, and they thankfully turned it around since then. But this is a team that you mentioned Harbaugh, and he is a guy that tends to go on an emotional roller coaster throughout the season, and he tends to get his guys really fired up for the big games. And I think conversely, that can have a negative effect for the games that maybe aren't necessarily as big. So I think for it not to be a sort of trap game, he's going to have to come out big time and, kind of drill it and instill it into these guys that you need to bring it each and every single week if you want to be a dominant team in this league. So, I mean, and it is tough. You're bringing in Finley. There's no NFL tape on him. I was watching a little bit of his preseason highlights earlier today, and he's a guy who I think is he's elusive against pressure, or at least he was against the guys in the preseason, and he seems to have a good pocket presence to him, and maybe poise, if you want to call it that. I feel like that's kind of an overrated, overused term, but he's a guy who I think definitely is going to be in the league for a long time. I don't know in what capacity, but I guess we're going to find out on Sunday. And Zach Taylor came from Sean McVay, not for nothing. So, if I could definitely see it turning into, if not a win for the Bengals, a very close game in which the Ravens get out of Cincy, feeling a little lucky to have gotten one.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit before he came on about AJ Green, and he's, I guess, up in the air for this game. Just real quick, as a Ravens fan, which player do you despise more, AJ Green or Tyler Boyd?
I can't hate AJ Green, man. He's just such a good dude and an amazing player to watch. He's destroyed my favorite team over the years, which really sucks. But and I really don't hate Boyd either. I mean, that play.
Not even for that one play.
You know what, dude? That play got us Lamar Jackson. So,
Damn.
I mean, if they make the
I blame
playoffs that year
myself.
with Joe Flacco, they're probably not drafting Jackson. So, that's the way I've at least spin zoned it in my head.
Well, even when the Baltimore Ravens lose, they still win.
I don't know about that. At least in that scenario.
Whereas when the Bengals win, they lose. So that's interesting how that all works out. Jacob Loque with Baltimore Beatdown, SB Nation's Baltimore Ravens website, joining us. Good to have you back on the show, man. Before we get you out of here, what I think you kind of said prediction. You think it might be somewhat closer than people think. If you've got a score prediction, we'll take it. We'll also like to hear where people can hear your stuff, read your stuff, all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Stuff.
Yeah. So to get into that stuff, score prediction, I'd probably go an ugly Ravens win, about 23-15, a lot of field goals. The Ravens do not cover the, I think, 10-point spread it is right now. And yeah, like I said, they get out of there at 7-2, happy to be where they are. Yeah, so that's what I would say. As far as where you can find us on SB Nation, it's BaltimoreBeatdown.com is the domain if you want to check any of our stuff out ahead of the game leading up to this weekend. You can find our show. It's just the Baltimore Beatdown podcast on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your stuff. So, yeah, tune in. We're going to have Anthony on real quick after this if you want to keep hearing his beautiful voice. And we really appreciate you guys. And tank for Tua, right?
Well, tank for somebody. Tank for somebody.
Yeah, right.
I will talk to you in a few minutes, my friend.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Jake. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll definitely get your info out there for our readers and listeners to check your stuff out. But talk to you soon, bud.
Good deal. Appreciate it, guys.
All right. That was Jacob Loque of Baltimore Beatdown, the SB Nation, Baltimore Ravens site. Go check out their podcast. Go check out everything they're doing over there, especially this week and really at least twice a year because the Bengals play them twice a year and obviously an interdivision rival. So you may want to just kind of check them out to keep tabs on things going on over in Baltimore. What a show this evening. We've had two guests. The show has kind of flown by. We're going to get out of here in just a minute. That interview, again, was brought to you by Casabel Realty Group, the Southern California real estate experts. So go to CasabelRealtyGroup.com to get information on the Southern California real estate market, information, all of that good stuff. Check out their website. If you're in the area and you happen to listen to this podcast, if you are out of the area and are looking to relocate to Southern California, definitely take advantage of their services. John, before we get out of here, man, it's been a calendar week for Bengals franchise quarterbacks, has it not?
Yes, it has.
I am not going to mention number 14 because anytime
we talk about him enough.
That and anytime we seem to mention him on a show, we get comments about how mean we are to him. So I'm not going to talk about him. We're going to talk about his predecessor, Carson Palmer.
Oh, because he's definitely more liked than.
Well, of course, yes. Look, I think by now everybody kind of knows the infamous quotes he has said he said recently in a podcast. I think it was through Colin Cowherd's network, or it was with a different host. But
yeah,
I guess your thoughts on it. I mean, kind of to top to me. Well, your thoughts.
So, I mean, it's been 8 years of this, and it's none of the information that CP9 has said is false. And that's, I think, the most important thing about it. It's like, yeah, it's true. And I think most Bengals fans who have a brain know it. And definitely most people who follow the NFL know these things to be true about the Bengals. So I can't fault him for speaking the truth. But at some point, man, we get it. We get it. And I know that he's being asked to go on these shows and talk about it. And he has more experience with the Bengals organization than most other quarterbacks do, obviously. But at the same time, man, we don't need to be hammered down with this information. We know this, you know this. It's just known facts. Let's just go ahead and move on at this point.
Right. I find it interesting that, Carson kind of took the high road while he was still playing in terms of, I don't want to talk about this. I'm not going to throw the organization under the bus. I'm just going to move on. He didn't say anything publicly about it. He just kind of moved on. It's hard to disagree with anything he says, really.
Because you can't, because it's right.
It's right. I mean, Jim Quinn, he just shared a story at the beginning of the episode about Mike Brown that kind of says it all about the organization, right? So it's hard to sit here and go, oh, Carson, you're such a liar or whatever. My thing that kind of took a little bit of a validity hit in his comments was talking about the preeminent franchises and how they're run in the Oakland Raiders and the Arizona Cardinals. Sorry. Those aren't two very well-run organizations in the NFL either. That's where I took a little bit of an issue. Granted, the Cardinals have stepped up and put him in their ring of honor. They did that this year, and they apparently treated him very well. He had more success with Arizona in terms of postseason wins and whatnot than he did in Cincinnati. But let's not pretend that those two are the shining beacon of NFL success and or how to run an NFL franchise. They have had their share of dysfunction.
Yeah, and I think it's all relative, right? Because and his main comments about those two teams were like they understood the facet of just supplementing your team with quality free agent talent, and they were aggressive in that approach. So yeah, like the Raiders and Cardinals are not the beacons of hope for NFL franchises, but when you compare them to the Bengals, everything's relative, right? And what Palmer's main qualms with the Bengals were, that's where the Raiders and Cardinals, relative to the Bengals standards, stepped up, and that's why he ended up having success in Arizona, because they ended up building a good team around him. So when you're treated that well, you're going to end up saying nice things, especially compared to your ex in that sense.
Yeah, and I just, to kind of put a ribbon on this thing, because we got to get out of here, and I don't want to belabor this, but it's just interesting to see how Carson went from I'm not talking about this to then doing kind of the football life thing where he talked a little bit about it. Then, if you remember, John, there was the interview, I believe, when the Bengals hired Zach Taylor, where he kind of made a little jab saying good luck to him. That's a tough organization to work for. And then he raked him over the coals, in this interview. So it's just kind of interesting to see the evolution or de-evolution, I guess, of, his opinion of the team and how he's openly aired them. Look, it's not stuff, some of which we knew, if not a lot of it or all of it. It's not surprising that it came from him, I guess, in some ways, but, it was just kind of an unloading and a little bit of gasoline on the fire. That is an 0-8 season in the start to the Zach Taylor era, and we would be remiss if we did not bring that up in some fashion. We're going to get out of here, though, John. Unless you got anything else you want to talk about with Carson's war of words.
CP9 is of the past, but this Ravens game is of the future, and Anthony's about to be on a podcast of his own. But I actually had I had the luck of being on a Ravens podcast of a different one. It's called Charm City Birdwatch. Recorded a couple days ago, and it was just actually uploaded just now. I will retweet it onto my timeline, but Jake McDonald had me on for about 15-20 minutes previewing the game, so definitely check that out. Give those guys a listen.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks. That's good that we're kind of expanding our reach, and that's part of what we do here with these matchups. We want to go on other shows and have people on our shows to kind of get a look over the other side of the fence. That's what it's about. Want to thank our special guest this week. We have Jim Quinn, author and attorney and author of the book, Don't Be Afraid to Win, How Free Agency Changed the Business of Pro Sports. Go get that book. It's awesome. I'm telling you, it's awesome. I wouldn't have him on, and I wouldn't be pumping it as much as I am if I didn't find it to be an enjoyable read. Go get that, especially if you're a bookworm. Go get that book. Appreciate him coming on. Appreciate Jacob Loque from SB Nation's Baltimore Beatdown coming on the show to preview Week 10. This has been the Orange and Black Insider. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. Get this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, now on iHeartRadio. It's also on YouTube, the Megaphone platform, and CincyJungle.com. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our channels. And we'll see you next time. We'll probably get to some listener questions this Friday, too. So send those our way again for a Friday afternoon session if you want to kick off your weekend. We'll see you then.